David Vizard here. You guys are watching PowerTec 10. In this edition, we're going to look at something that's an element in the engine building process that very often gets overlooked, and it is the dynamic compression. Now, I know there's some people who don't think this is very important. I did read in Speed Talk that one guy whom I thought was pretty switched on, well, I still think he's pretty switched on, can't remember exactly who it was now, claimed that the dynamic compression ratio was virtually irrelevant. I beg to disagree. No, it's not me disagreeing, sorry. I've made a statement there which sounds like an opinion. The Dyno disagrees, right? So this guy's not got an argument with me, he's got an argument with the Dyno. And I know who's going to win. The Dyno. Anyway, on with the subject. First off, what is the dynamic compression ratio? That is the compression ratio that exists at the point the intake valve closes on up. So instead of using the cubic inches of the engine to its full extent, which assumes the intake valve closes at bottom dead center after an induction stroke, it assumes that the compression of the mixture only starts when the valve closes. And of course, with a big cam, the piston can be a quarter of the way up the bore. So the dynamic compression ratio is always less. Now, there is this claim that as the cam gets on the cam, so it fills the cylinder more. Well, that may be so, but the engine likes to have this dynamic compression ratio taken into account, greatly so if you are concerned with your low speed torque, and slightly less greatly so if you're concerned with your top end power. So whichever way you look at it, it's important. I started to write my Pinto book, my 2-liter Pinto book, way back to probably about a year after they came out. That's the 2-liter one, which by the way is a much better engine for overall design than the 2.3. Now, I've talked a little about this dynamic compression ratio, but let's, as I said earlier on, let's see what the Dyno says. Here's some figures which I got when I was dyno testing, and this is a long time ago now, at Ocelli Engineering. And I think I was doing this testing with David Ray, because that's who I usually did it with there. But anyway, we tested with 2 camshafts. The stock one, and I can't remember what one it was, but it's one we asked to have ground to what we wanted. And it was about 30 degrees longer duration. Anyway, take a look at this chart here. It shows the torque output. Now you can see the stock cam, that's the one at the dark blue, with the stock compression ratio, which I think was about 9:1. Then we put in this bigger cam. Oh, and each cam was timed in with a variable cam time. You can't do cam tests without variable cam timing to optimize them. Then we put in the other cam the longer cam, and you'll see how much low speed torque it dropped. Now I'm showing just the torque here because I don't want to confuse the graphs. You'll see it dropped a bunch of low speed torque. We then took the head off and planed off, as much as we could, and I don't know how much that was, it's not really relevant. It was enough to raise the compression ratio quite a lot, and I think we went from about 9:1 to about 11.5:1, somewhere around there. Maybe a bit more, maybe as much as 12:1. Anyway, look how the torque went up. At the bottom end, it almost matched the torque we had with the stock cam. But look how much it carries on up the top end. Much better. Let's just swap to the horsepower figures. Here they are. You can see that with the dynamic compression ratio raised to suit the cam, the power went up considerably. I should say that the torque went up considerably right through the RPM range. Now look how much power extra it gave. A huge amount. I mean, it made more horsepower by a factor of probably 250% than it did when it just was the cam. So this is not a small change in power, it's a very big one. Something else I should say here, while I think of it, is if you've built your engine right and you've matched the compression ratio to its dynamic requirement consistent with the fuel we've got available. Well, let's say the fuel available is always sufficient in terms of octane. Then you can tell whether you've got the cam right in the engine. Because if the build has been done properly, there will be a certain amount of foot-pounds per cube at that point on your build, on the stage of build. So, for instance, if you've got a 10.5:1 motor, if you've built the engine right, and I'm thinking now in terms of a nicely built street motor, nothing exotic, just well done. Got the right pistons, right rings, etc., etc. It should be pretty close to 1.4 foot-pounds per cube. My motors consistently make 1.388. That's my most consistent number. That's with a regular, good build. With a really, how shall I say, over-the-top build where I go to infinite details and, like windaging the crank, making sure all the oil flows back easy, getting it clear of the crankshaft, all those little things that I've seen as much as 1.41 foot-pounds per cube at 10.5. Now, if you're building a pro stock motor, you should be able to get, allowing all the tricks, other tricks that are done, you should be able to get somewhere around 1.7, 1.8 foot-pounds per cube. That's a very expensive deal though. But anyway, back onto my point. Compression versus camshaft requirements. So let's deal with that. How do we calculate the dynamic compression? Well, I'm pretty sure that one of Stan's programs got that on. I'll look into that before I post it. And it will give you an idea. But to give you a feel for where you need to be on this, if you're using street pump gas, you need to have a dynamic compression ratio between 8 and 8.5. 8.5 is really the limit on this. If you're building a race motor, it should not be less than 9:1. If you're building a pro stock motor, it should be over 10:1. Here's the curve of the torque per cubic inch. that I talked about. Now these should be your target torque figures. If you're not achieving something close to these, or even better, something in excess of these, then you've got a problem. Identifying that problem is going to be a little difficult, but if you've built the engine right in terms of friction and induction, then your number one problem is the lobe centerline angle of the cam or the advance of the cam. Nothing else. Now, some interesting little facts here that might interest you, which I'll just round up with. If we want to turn torque per cube into brake mean effective pressure, then multiply the torque per cube by 151. That will give you the brake mean effective pressure. For what it's worth, a good high performance engine should be in the, normally aspirated, should be in the 220 psi range. That's your goal there. Let's throw in a few dragster facts here. What's the brake mean effective pressure of a top fuel car? Well, it's near 2000 psi. The explosive force in a cylinder of a top fuel car is about equal to the explosive force of a 50 caliber rifle round, which, let me tell you, if you've ever fired a 50 cal, the recoil on it is pretty horrific. Not so bad if you weigh 300 pounds, but if you're only a 175 pounder, boy, I tell you, pulling that trigger is something you contemplate, then pull it. You don't just casually pull the trigger. I think that's about it for this episode. But let's remember that this torque per cube is one of the most important analytical elements of whether we've succeeded in our engine build or not. So take that curve I've given you very seriously. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget, we need your comments, we need your likes, and we need your subscriptions. It doesn't take you much to do that. It takes me a lot of time to do this. So please do so. Subscribe, like, etc., etc. Okay, I will talk to you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.